The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to another exciting episode of In Conversation with Alethia. I'm your host, Alethia O'Hara-Stephenson. In each episode, I sit down with amazing individuals who are doing incredible and inspiring things in our community. The show will educate, it will empower, and it will inspire you. In this episode, I am honored to have an amazing individual. She is an author, she's a speaker, and she's also a municipal councillor. Her name is Barbara Lustgarten Evoy, and she's here to talk to us about family wellness and human trafficking. Welcome to In Conversation with Alethia, Barbara.
Oh my gosh, this is so overdue. I'm so incredibly happy to be sitting here with you. Thank you for the introduction, but I really have to turn it back on you and say, I've been watching you. We've met each other in different platforms over the years, and I've been watching you and what you're doing for a long time, and I think it's time we took a minute to celebrate you, because you're doing great things, Alethia.
Thank you.
And you know, I always talk about sisters locking arms, and this is a perfect example of what I try to do in this life, is to support other women and to help each other to serve the greater good. So
I
thanks
love
for having
that.
me.
Thank you. And thank you for celebrating me. I think it is absolutely important for us women to be able to lift each other up
100%.
and just support each other. We can go so much farther when we're locked arm in arm. So thank you.
Awesome. We'll use that together now.
Yes, I love it. And so here we are, we're talking about, family wellness. And what is family wellness all about? When I think about family wellness, normally my thought goes towards just mental health, but it incorporates so much more than that.
It really does, because we have, as we spoke in our pre-interview, a limited and a finite amount of time. I'm cognizant of not spending too much time on this, but everything that I do, I've been a school board trustee, I own a business that works with kids, I volunteer throughout our community and into the provincial level, working at tables, trying to support our family well-being. I believe wholeheartedly, without any judgment to any parent, it's a hard job.
Yes.
And it's even harder today than it's ever been. I think we have somehow begun to lose, or perhaps the thread has begun to fray on that which holds our families together. And it's concerning to me. With my business that works with struggling students they're struggling socially, academically, and in a variety of ways. And the one common thing that I see is that the family unit as we once knew it is not around us. It's stopped us from telling stories, and our Indigenous elders and guides can tell us the value in storytelling. We've run out of time for that. The parents are working.
I'm curious as to what you think could be the underlying cause of why families have run out of those opportunities to tell stories.
Great question. Actually, really great question. I think, and this is totally my response to my answer, but I think a lot of the reason, frankly, is people can't afford financially to spend that time anymore, and I'm not sure everybody realizes at what cost that's coming. To have to work, to have to pay the bills, we can never take that truth away from our families and our young parents. Additionally, it's making it a lot harder for the family unit to be unified as it once was, and I think that lack of unification, lack of collaboration is showing in our young children. And I feel very strongly about the saying, we're raising adults. We're not raising children, we're raising adults, and part of that means teaching them what it means to be a community citizen and a global citizen, and what does that mean. And I had a show on another station called Parenting with Barbara, and it was all about the struggles that our families are up against right now. And honestly, there was never a shortage of guests, because almost every place we look, we'll see I don't want to say downfall because it's not all bad, but we'll see the repercussions of not having time for families.
And that's, you touched on some really important points because, you know, growing up, at least with my generation, it was a sense of community, a community raising our children. And I find today, you know, adults don't necessarily wrap their arms around kids. It's, you know, usually they're head down or they're focused on their own path, which is mind-blowing because you're the adult, you're supposed to be there to nurture and mentor, but that nurturing and mentorship from a community perspective, in most cases, have disappeared.
Well, and it's also important that we understand, I think technology, and to have followed me at all is to know that, you know, I recognize the glory that tech is, but also the other side of that coin and what it's costing us. But I think also, again, I'm reluctant to blame anybody, but I'm not sure our communities even know what that looks like anymore. I think a lot of families think that having their children engaged in 47 hours a week of playtime, organized playtime, is all that's needed. In fact, an interesting stat or interesting point, 90-some% of all children born after 1996, and don't quote me, but that was what I recall, have never experienced unsupervised outdoor play. Parents don't say, go out and play. Wow. We grew up figuring stuff out with our feet in the dirt and, you know, getting rained on and falling in the mud and playing tag outside and figuring things out. And that's a piece of our community. It's not like that. When was the last time you walked by and saw a bunch of kids playing?
Yeah, and the rare chance that you do see that, you know, and even with my family, I am that mom. Where are you going? What time are you coming home?
That's okay, but you're letting them go.
True.
So my parents asked me where I was going, but then they said, now go. You know, like, when will you be home? But to just see children out playing, it's just not, there's lots of outdoor play. There's just very little unsupervised and unorganized outdoor play.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a big question about what is family wellness.
And you know, you touched on, you know, an important factor there that I want to bring back. You talked about families being busy and they can't afford to stay home. And when you look at family wellness, that also contributes to the health of children, 100%. Right? Because now you're having to have fast food. You're not having those wholesome, hearty meals being prepared at home.
Homework is a thing of the past. You know, church. People think that, and not telling anybody how to live their religious beliefs. I feel like people think that family time means driving their children from one activity to another, and it's again, at what cost? We're in changing times. We're in changing times for sure.
And the other piece that you touched on, I want to elaborate on, is conversations, right? Conversations are so critical because that's how you're able to pass on that generational knowledge to our young people. And if you're not having those conversations about how mom grew up, our kids are lost.
1000%. And everybody, again, we can learn from you know, our Indigenous leaders who have been the best at storytelling. And we have forgotten that art. And if you ever look at a child and you take that 5 minutes, I used to talk, I do a lot of speaking, and I used to have this one workshop that was focused on 5 minutes a day. And there was actually a man who complained. He actually put in a complaint because he believed that talking about 5 minutes a day with your child was rhetoric. And I'm like, well, okay. I think the idea of spending 2 or 3 minutes with your child and telling them a story, even if it's not entirely correct, you don't remember all the details. How many times do you see little kids saying, when I was little? They love it. They love it. It's how we create healthy adults. And it's I could go on forever. Obviously, I could go on forever, but family wellness is physical health and mental health and communicative skills and the ability to be transparent and to share and to learn what autonomy means and accountability. It just,
I love that.
That's a thing for me. It's
no, and you're talking about some of the things that families can do, that 5-minute conversation. What else, especially the fact that you've had so much experience working with young people, what else can families do?
The biggest thing is 5 minutes a day. And that means without the TV on, not in the car when you're concentrating on driving and you can't look at them eye to eye. The best best thing is go and sit on your child's bed for 5 minutes, make sure all the tech is turned off, just sit down and say, woof, I had a day, and share. They may not be willing to share with you at first, but they will certainly listen, and they'll come to listen, especially if you're not going in there with a lecture or a to-do list, just going in as a person in the household that wants to share. I mean, I could go, again, I could give you a long list of things that I think are important. Remember that people learn better in motion. The best way to get something through to somebody is to go for a walk and do it. Don't do it whilst, don't lecture them. If you're dealing with a child who's struggling with making safe decisions, walk by the room when you're watching a show about anything that might relate to a decision a teenager might have to make. And one comment, not a lecture, not a big long diatribe about how they need to ask. 1 or 2 words about what you think.
Love that.
And positive reinforcement, but be real. The parent who puts a drawing of a stick figure up on the wall and compares it to the work of Picasso, your child is not dumb. They know what you're doing. So celebrate what you know your child does well, and help them to find many things about themselves. Because as we get into the human trafficking piece, much of the vulnerability that sees people at risk come from a place of lack of self-esteem. And much of the work that I do is about building self-esteem. I started a group called Rise Up, Raising Individual Self-Esteem, long before the school boards used that name.
Right.
And it was all about helping you to understand the value, parents to understand the value and the importance of building self-esteem in our children. And if you think that being a star on a hockey team is all it takes,
no.
I'm here to caution you that that's not true.
They need other skills to help them develop and grow, more than just being, hey, you're a champ, you know, you scored that awesome goal, right?
Right. You need to travel with me. We need to start, we need to do a thing, because we can tag team beautifully. Yeah, it's a thing. And so with your permission, I'll slide into human trafficking.
Yeah, before we go into human trafficking, I want to touch on, you know, something else that you mentioned. You talked about sharing your story, but what about asking the students, the youth, or anyone for that matter, tell me about your day?
The reason I didn't lead with that's a great question. Again, you're really good at this. The reason I didn't lead with that is because they're very reluctant to do that.
Right.
And you might get very prescribed responses. Whereas if you start with what your day was like, you're more likely, you're taking the pressure off of them, and you're more likely to hear their responses, which might organically take you to them sharing about theirs when they're ready. But the whole thing is to remove the pressure of establishing that relationship with your little one. And it takes time if you haven't been doing it. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. I always tell parents the work is yours, not theirs. And so when you walk into that room, walk in fully ready to just say, woof, that was a day. And share your own stories.
I like that.
Let's take the pressure off of them.
Yeah, good point, good point. Now, I know the next segment we're going to dive into human trafficking. So in 30 seconds or less, can you talk about what human trafficking is, and then we'll dive into it in greater detail?
Yeah, no, yes and no. So human trafficking, there's many different pieces that fall under human trafficking. Labor trafficking, forced labor, modern slavery, domestic. There's all different kinds of trafficking. Organ trafficking, there's all different kinds of it. But if we're talking today, my focus was going to be about sex trafficking. And it's funny the amount of people that struggle with that word, but it's being forced to have sex for money and without being free to really make your own decisions. It's very insidious. It's everywhere. It's I started. I'll just back up again with your permission. I come from deep abuse.
Okay, so on that note, we're going to pause because I don't want to miss any of the key points. So we're going to pick that up in the next segment.
Oh,
so,
you have two segments. Okay, she's got it going on.
So we will be right back with In Conversation with Alethia. I am in the studio with Barbara Lustgarten Evoy, and we're talking about human trafficking. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
We can be hurt. We can be bruised. We can be broken. Slowed down, confused, and even numbed. But we can't be defeated. We're built on a foundation that's strong, our mission unwavering, and together we'll beat as as one.
This is Rogers TV.
Welcome back to In Conversation with Alethia. I am in the studio with Barbara Lustgarten Evoy, and we're talking about human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. And you mentioned just before the break that you're coming from abuse, and so you wanted to dive into that story. Can you share a little bit about that journey and what took you into the world of human trafficking and advocating for our community?
Of course. Coming from such deep abuse and then thankfully finding a healthy relationship that I now celebrate.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. It was 10 years of a lot of pretty terrible domestic violence. And when I came here, I had some healing to do before I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my breath dealing with and trying to figure out how I was going to use that experience to serve other women. And I found my way, started working, talking to people, and that's actually how I got into the family wellness as well too. I think they're all connected. And then I started helping a local group in my area, Alora House, to raise awareness and raise some funds. But mostly we spent a year raising awareness in the community. So very clearly understand that there is no community in Canada that doesn't have this. There is almost no hotel or motel in our country that hasn't had cases.
How scary is that?
It is, when I say insidious, it is truly, I told our MPP that word, and he said that's the perfect word to describe what's happening around human trafficking. So where we're located, it's very, very serious. We are on what we call the 400 tunnel. So Toronto to Montreal to Ottawa, a lot of people are being trafficked. In fact, 96% of all trafficking in Canada is Canadian people trafficking Canadian children. So the average age is 12 to 14. Cases have been recorded of 6 months up to 30 years old. So yeah, there's a lot of people making really bad decisions, and a lot of it comes to money and vulnerability. The higher the world strife is, the higher the human trafficking numbers run. So for example, when the war broke out in Ukraine, went up millions. The global number went up millions. When with climate change, numbers going up millions. So as people are becoming displaced and not having enough money, I am not here to judge, but parents have to make decisions.
Right.
So, you know, sometimes I will humbly and so respectfully say, I do a lot of work, as you know, with families and a lot of volunteer work as well. And on the one hand, I want to say, have you thought about where you got that $2 t-shirt from? On the other hand, you know, I want to say to them, what did that family have to go through? Who had to go through what so that you can get a $2 t-shirt? On the other hand, there are families who can afford more than a $2 t-shirt. So that conflict is a conflict in my brain all the time.
Right.
And someone said to me, how do you deal with it? And I said, frankly, it depends what room I'm in, because that's where I have to put my focus. So trafficking became a bigger and bigger focus for me. And I'm a Rotarian, and there's a global group called Rotary Action Group Against Slavery that has 62 countries representing globally, and I am the ambassador for Canada, making us the 63rd country on the list. So when I was appointed, whatever word it is, I gathered some really great people doing great work, and there is no shortage of organizations doing great work across our country and beyond when it comes to human trafficking and modern slavery. So I gathered with, I'm going to name some names later, or we can put it up on your website, sites that people can go to get more information from very trusted people like the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking in Mississauga, to Ally Global in Vancouver, to International Justice Mission, which is worldwide, to the Mekong Club. These are all people on our committee. We worked with Paul Brandt, who started Not in My City as well. So we've worked with some really great people.
And what I find interesting, Barbara, is the fact that this is such I'm going to call it a world crisis, right?
Oh, it is.
But it's not something that we're finding in mainstream media. It's not talked about from a political level. We're not hearing about it from, you know, the people or leaders,
so
right?
I respectfully will add that our our committee works very, very closely with an all-party parliamentary group made up of 42 parliamentarians and politicians from across the country and across the parties. There's 41 of them doing great work, and we've just recently passed another law, a bill, S211, which is holding corporations responsible for their slavery footprint, which is ridiculously high. So there's a lot of work being done, and so I need to take a moment to honor the work that is being done at the federal level. We wrote a motion that is headed for the floor in both the Senate and the House of Commons that will see Canada, hopefully, being the first country in the world to declare zero tolerance to human trafficking. So what does that mean? Not much, because it's a motion and not a bill or an act, but it would influence the decisions of our government moving forward. So there is a lot of work being done. What you're not hearing is mainstream media, because going back to the family wellness, parents seem to think that to discuss sex means to push sex on children. There's a group of people that feel that way, not all. I stood on the street corner in Wellington County, literally on the street corner, handing out flyers with basic information, and had parents cover their children's ears at 12 years old. I'm not sure what words they thought I was going to use, but the number one thing in helping to prevent your child from becoming a victim is to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
So we go back to making it comfortable again, go back to our earlier thing of what you should do with relating to your child. If you're not being transparent and open and honest and real, you're putting your child at risk. It's just all there is to it. It has to happen.
And what I find interesting about this crisis is that it's not just happening to women, it also happens to men.
And yes, although
young boys.
Disproportionately to women, but certainly people who identify as different genders. But I also need to add that another disproportionate number is our First Nations and Indigenous women. The number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is extreme, and the same thing lands here. So I hosted an event. We put one on at the in Winnipeg at the Museum for Human Rights, and it was fascinating to see the people from all across our country attended to help be heard, to come together and say, how do we make this louder? How do we do this better? And that's the work that I'm doing right now, is to get as many large groups together to help sprinkle the country with more information. I don't know how else to say it.
Amazing work. And I want to touch on some quick stats, specifically for Dufferin-Caledon. So between 2018 and 2019, Dufferin-Caledon Victim Services was made aware of 22 victims of trafficking, with 7 being youth under the age of 18 and 14 victims being female.
It's interesting. In our pre-interview, we had discussed that, and thank you for sharing that. Suffice it to say, I was fortunate to work with Victim Services, OPP, and Crime Stoppers. I hosted events, and they came and spoke at them. And it's interesting to hear the numbers, because they're all over the map, and again, I appreciate that you found those, but they're nothing to what's really going on. That's why I didn't personally share those, because it makes it feel like it's not as bad as it is. It's way worse than that. It's
even
worse
these
than
numbers
that.
To me is alarming, and should be enough for parents to be on alert. And speaking of being on alert, what are some of the things that we can be on alert for and look out for?
That's so there are signs. I have a little mnemonic in my head. I just need to make sure I remember it. So I'm just going to go through them all so I don't forget the list, because I didn't want to miss any. One, suddenly your child's forgetting where they were. So when you say, where were you last night? Oh, gee, I don't remember. I can't recall. You'll see elevated anxiety. You'll see possibly them talking about a new job, maybe even a modeling job that they're very excited about. They might have 2 cell phones or extra cash around that they haven't had before. If you check, they don't have ID on them. Suddenly their ID is gone. Perhaps they're showing up late. They're starting to lie an awful lot. Maybe they're not coming home at all. They've got an older boyfriend that seems to be a little bit controlling. And not just boyfriend, let me be clear, an older friend or influential person in their life that suddenly seems to be helping to make their decisions.
And oftentimes it's someone who's very close close to them.
Oh, yeah. Or they become very close or fake close to them. Perhaps there is a lack of, they start to ignore you. They start to ignore the rules. They start to let go of their friends and family that used to mean so much to them.
Okay.
Skipping school, skipping meals, maybe drug use, signs of alcohol use. The list goes, I really didn't want to forget any of them, but the list goes on and on and on, basically changes in behavior. But it's very hard because that is all of these signs I just gave you are similar signs to a lot of other things that could be going on, which is why you need to take time to know your child.
Exactly.
And recognize these changes that are happening and have these frank conversations with them. These are signs that you can see in other people, maybe bruising. There's so much recruitment going on. I would like to tell you, as someone who spent a lot of time and still does in our school systems, I'd like to tell you that that's a safe space, but it's just not, because recruitment is happening in malls and on the street and wherever kids are hanging out and in schools. I recently met a woman who was taking care of her family member whilst he was waiting to be incarcerated. And he was a recruiter living in Toronto. He was a recruiter whose job was to meet young girls and befriend them and give them a drink or offer them whatever substance they might be interested in, and then take them back to the house. And that would be it. When I was preparing for the conference in Winnipeg, my husband and I were in KW. Lovely young lady. She's maybe 17, 18 years old. And she heard my husband and I talking. And she said, "Are you talking about human trafficking?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, I wasn't really a victim, but this is what happened to me." She and her friend, Betty Sue and Susie, were talking online, and they had a third friend, Tommy. And Tommy had asked Betty Sue to meet him at this hotel. Big warning, by the way. Asked to meet him at a hotel. And so she told her Susie friend, "I'll call you. I'm just heading up to meet Tommy."
Right.
And got to the hotel. Of course, Tommy wasn't there, and she was taken to a room and had her clothes removed and her phone taken away, and she was drugged.
Gosh.
And she was found because her friend had been informed and hadn't heard from her. And so she contacted authorities, and they were able to find her before she was taken away.
Oh my gosh.
So
Chance.
yeah, it's literally everywhere.
Wow.
Everywhere. Be acutely aware. It is everywhere. And there's it's up to all of us to stop this terrible, terrible crime.
And now, what can we do so we can stop it? But what are some of the appropriate tips that individuals can do? You know, calling OPP, but what else can individuals do?
Really alerting authority. It's really, really, really difficult. It's not something that anybody would tell you to dive in on.
Yeah.
It's one of the big top 3 organized crime in the world. This is not something that Mrs. Jones is supposed to go and fight. There are people, our law enforcement and our government does such great work, so much better than people know on this. Almost every OPP in our province, as far as I know, and our country, frankly, has created teams to fight human trafficking.
Perfect.
So call
Thank
the police.
you. Amazing, amazing. Thank you. A very tough conversation to have, Barbara, but thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us this afternoon. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on another amazing episode of In Conversation with Alethia. Tune in next time. And thank you to our amazing sponsors, Town Teas, for doing our logo, as well as Moonstone by Myra for the amazing jewelry. Tune in next time.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Are you low on food? Struggling to pay the bills? Overwhelmed by life's challenges?